Hey guys, I wanted to do something new tonight. I wanted to do a Facebook Live to test it out and to talk about an article I wrote last week that's gone pretty popular on Medium, and that is on the topic of minimum viable research. So, first of all, I just want to introduce myself in case you don't know me. I am Sarah Doody, a user experience designer and entrepreneur based in New York City. And I do a lot of teaching and writing and speaking, as well as a weekly user experience newsletter called The UX Notebook. You can find it at theuxnotebook.com. But one of the big things that I am focusing on right now is research. And the reason that I've decided to focus on user research is primarily because, well, two reasons, I guess. First of all, it's one of the questions that people email me or tweet me about the most. And the question mainly is, how do you get your colleagues and stakeholders to buy into user research? And the reason is that I think a lot of designers find that on their teams, the teams end up releasing features or products and then people don't end up using them. And that's super frustrating because what happens is you have to go back and then fix these things that are already been released. And that just starts to accumulate, and it's very, very expensive and time consuming. And the frustration for a designer is that we know that if we could have been either involved sooner in the process, or if we could have done research along the way, we really could have prevented this launch and fix cycle because we would have launched the right things the first time around. So that's one of the reasons. The second reason that I want to focus on user research is because in my own design practice, whenever I am talking to either existing clients or new clients, it's very, very evident that they have not done enough research. And the reason that I know this is because many times they come to me, and this actually happened a couple of days ago. I was at the airport having a call with a guy who was telling me all about his product. And I said, tell me about this. I don't know anything. And so he proceeded to start to basically list out a bullet list of features. And I didn't understand the problem he was solving and who he was solving it for, which are two of the main important kind of foundations or bedrocks of product development. You have to understand who is the person that needs this and why do they need it? What problem will it solve? And so I see time and time again, way too many product teams building these features that are just a bullet point of features, or a bullet list, of features, and they're lacking in that knowledge of who the customer is and what their problem is. And when you don't understand your customer, or you can't even identify them, and you can't identify their problem, then how in the world are you supposed to know what features they need? So what happens is that a lot of teams will then just start basically kind of throwing spaghetti at a wall, where they're just throwing feature after feature after a feature onto their roadmap and then into their weekly sprints or bi-weekly sprints. And next thing you know, the product is, it's either over budget, it's delivered late, and you end up with this product that has so many features that some user is totally confused because they don't understand what problem this product is supposed to solve, because there's just like this collection of disjointed features that are all slopped together without really showing one singular focus on solving one specific problem. And one example I would, give is a while ago, I think it was 2007 or 2008, which makes me feel really old. Google launched the thing called Google Wave. And Google Wave was touted as having the ability to change how we communicate. It was going to be this revolutionary tool. Some people said it was going to be an email killer. And there was all this fanfare. Everyone was talking about it. And it launched, and no one used it. And the problem was that it was just a collection of strung together features that didn't form a singular solution. And also, it required that users learn all kinds of new vocabulary. For example, there was waves and waveforms and wavelengths and all these weird words they made up. And it was meaningless to the user or the intended user. The other problem with Google Wave, like I said, there was no singular use case. There was no solid example of, you could use Google Wave to blank. No one, or at least Google, wasn't communicating that. And ultimately, Google Wave ended up dying off. And I read a really cool article that a UX designer had written. There was some little group of UX designers that all got on Wave and were trying to use it. And their feedback in this article, or the reaction, I guess, was that Google Wave lacked this solid example of, why would you use it? And they said, in hindsight, Google should have launched this product and said, hey, Google Wave is a great way to plan a group vacation or plan a wedding or something, but focus on a singular use case so that people arriving at the site could have context as to what they could do. And then also you'd have a very specific group of people who are all using it around the same use case. And then you could gather a lot of feedback from them to figure out what's working, what's not working. And then once you felt like it was really working well for the travel use case or wedding use case, you could then either A, go get more of those travel or wedding people, or you could then go after another group of people. Like Google Wave is a great way to keep track of your kid's softball team, whatever it is. The point here is that without a solid solution, without a solid problem and a solid audience, it makes new users have to work way too hard. New users don't want to have to figure out what's the purpose of your product. So I feel like I just went on a big rant there, but bringing that back to user research, so that's just an example of a place where I feel like Google Wave, that team, probably didn't do enough research. And I don't know who made that at Google. I tried to do some research. I'm pretty sure it was a team in Australia, I believe. But all that to say, I just think that if they had done research, they would have known who the customer was and what problem to solve for those people. But it was just too overwhelming. So if you are a user experience designer, a user experience researcher, a product manager, marketing manager, someone that knows that you should be doing user experience research, getting to know your customers, but your team hasn't bought into it, then I want to spend the next little bit talking about that. So, minimum viable research. Let me take a step back. And first of all, to figure out the problem of why does our team, our stakeholders, our client, our boss, why is there this resistance to research? I look at this and I think, okay, this is a problem, but it's just like any other problem that I set out to solve in user experience. And what do I mean by that? So I think to myself, what's the first thing I do when I set out on a new project? I want to understand the audience. In the same way with this problem of, we can't get anyone to buy into research, I think to myself, okay, who's our audience? So first recommendation is to know your audience. And what does that mean? That means taking a step back and thinking about who your stakeholder is, who your client is, who your boss is, and figure out what is making them be resistant to research. Now, you'll have your assumptions. The best way to find out really why they don't want to do research is to go and talk to them. So I would find time to go have a one-on-one with your boss or your teammates, whomever is resistant, and figure out why they don't want to do research. Now, I wouldn't just say, why don't you want to do research? Because they probably are just going to give you some stock answer of, it's too expensive, it's too time consuming, those things that you already know they're going to say. What you want to do is go really deep and figure out what is the underlying fears they have, what's the underlying assumptions, what's the root cause that exists below the surface of their knee-jerk reaction of, don't have the time, don't have the money, no one on our team has the experience. So what I would do is I would just sit down with them and I'd have a conversation and I would try and get answers to some of these questions. So I would say to them, well, why do you think research has to be time consuming and has to be expensive? What's your experience with research in the past? And the goal is that you want them to start telling you the stories of their past experiences doing research. So if you ask a question, when was the last time you did research? Or tell me about a time when you were working at another company, how did they do research? And then you'll start to hear these stories, and I guarantee people will start telling you stories. And from those stories, you'll get to hear the other experiences that they've had that have formed these beliefs that they have now that are making them not want to do research anymore. So get them to tell you the stories of their past experience with research, and then you'll understand the root cause of what their key issue is. I have a ton of other questions you could ask in the article, so I'll link to it somehow in this. Or you can just go to my Medium account and it's kind of stuck at the top of my profile. But first step in getting people to buy into research is to know your audience. I would also try and make sure you understand who else might be influencing this person, because maybe they are the decision maker, but maybe there's someone above them that is influencing them. So try and figure that out as well. But once you know your audience, then you have to, step 2 is know your product. And what do I mean by that? So I mean that in order to start planning user research and getting buy-in for it, we have to understand our product. So we want to be looking at our Google Analytics or any other analytics we have installed, and we want to use those analytics tools as like a spotlight to help shine a light on the area of the product that is having the most problem. And what type of problem? Well, I would be looking for problems that are related to your key metrics that you guys are basing the success of your product after. So if it's a commerce site, I'd be looking at your checkout or your product detail pages or your sign-up flow. If it's just a landing page for a product that hasn't launched yet, I'd be looking at how many people are signing up versus visiting your landing page. But you want to know your product, and the reason that you need to get familiar with those analytics is so that you can start to, like I said, shine a light on the problem areas of your product, because people will have gut reactions as to what the problem areas of your product are, but you want to use these analytics to have data to help shine a light on where the problem areas are. So that's step number 2. First, you know your audience, then you know your product. And then once you know your audience and your product, then you can start to plan out what I call minimum viable research. So I call it minimum viable research because we're all familiar with the minimum viable product concept, and I thought it was a good way to approach research too. So with minimum viable product, you're trying to build the smallest feature set that you can to really validate that what you have built solves the problem for your users or customers. And you don't want to build it all, you just want to build the minimum so that you don't waste a ton of time making something no one wants. So in the same way with minimum viable research, you don't want to go out and spend 20 grand or 30 grand doing this giant research project, because first of all, you're never going to get approval for that if you have resistance to that on your team. So by going for minimum research, the goal here is that we do the smallest amount of research that's going to yield the biggest, for lack of a better word, but aha moment to your team. So if you're working on, say, an e-commerce site, I would, let's just hypothetically say, I wouldn't try and look at doing research for the entire product, you know, from the point that someone maybe does a search on Google, clicks a link, lands up on a product page on your site, and then does some browsing and finally adds something to their cart and then eventually checks out. That's way too much to do all at once. What I would do is focus on one very specific part of that flow, and I would know which part of the flow to look at because my analytics would have confirmed any gut reactions that me and my team would have concerning what are our problem areas. So let's assume our problem area is the checkout. Let's assume that our store, people are finding it, they're adding stuff to their carts, but only 2% of people are checking out, let's say. So that's way below what we want. And so instead of trying to propose a giant research project for the whole experience, I would recommend going to your boss and your team and saying, look, I think we have a problem here based on what we're seeing in analytics, because they're going to love that. And bonus points if you can get your customer service team on board with this, because they are kind of the first line of defense and they will hear a lot of feedback concerning where people have problems with your site as well. So recommend to your boss or stakeholders that you want to do this research on this very, very specific part of your product experience, because customer service is indicating that it's a problem area, analytics are indicating it's a problem area, and just our general product knowledge indicates that it's a problem area. So what I would do is then I would say, okay, we want to do this minimum research on the checkout flow. And what we want to do, I mean, there's a ton of ways you could do the research. I think for the first time that you try and get people to buy into research, you want to do both quantitative and qualitative research, because just doing qualitative research, meaning talking to users one-on-one, that is not going to be enough for some people. Some people are going to want to see numbers. So what I would do, you want this minimum viable research to be a little bit scientific. So I would use something like Optimizely, which is great for A/B testing, and I would design a few experiments that you can A/B test to get data to show your boss, stakeholders, whomever. So maybe, I'm totally making this up, but maybe we are testing out the placement of the continue button. So you know how in most checkout flows, you go from step 1 and your personal information, your name, email, etc. Then you go to your billing information and your shipping information, and it's step, 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 step. Normally, there's some type of little continue button along the way, and maybe the problem is that people are not seeing the continue button, or maybe a problem is that when people try and continue and they encounter errors, the errors are not clear enough. Maybe they're like in blue text or orange text or something, and it's not like screaming in someone's face that there's an error, and then they just get frustrated and leave because they can't figure out why they can't continue on to the next step. So getting into the weeds here, but the point is we're not going to test the whole flow. We want to test something very, very specific. So try changing, in this example, I guess, making the error states more clear, or changing the position of the continue button, or changing the text from continue to next step. But we want to do something very, very specific for two reasons. First of all, so that it's not going to take us a long time to do this study. We want to be able to be done with this very fast, like a couple of days, a week at most would be amazing. Also, we don't want to test too many things at once because it will cause people to lose focus. So figure out what the minimum thing you can test is, how fast you can test that, and then do the test. And whenever it's done and it's time to go back to your colleagues and tell them what you've learned, I do have a few tips for how to present those findings. So I would say, first of all, anytime I present research findings, I identify my insights and then I back them up with evidence. So if through the research I've had an insight that, for example, looking at analytics, looking at these A/B tests, and realizing that if we move the continue button to like up the screen, let's say, of this commerce checkout flow, and we change the text from continue to next step, that sees a 10% increase in people getting through the checkout. Again, totally hypothetical. So that's my insight, is that people aren't getting through the checkout flow because they don't understand how to go from step to step. So my evidence for that would be the results from these A/B tests. Hopefully also, so that's like quantifiable numbers, like X% more people were able to go on through the whole step, all 4 steps, than the people who were just using the normal version of the site. Other things that you would want to add as evidence is things like click maps. So click maps are going to show you where people's mouse was on the page and where they clicked, even if it's not a button that they're clicking. And that's honestly table stakes when it comes to research. There's no effort on your part to do that. It's just something that you install on your site and it's running. So if you don't have heat mapping and click mapping software on your site, then you're kind of being lazy and you need to get that installed. Other things, if you had a little more time, especially once you get, your Optimizely set up and your click and heat map stuff installed, and obviously you have to wait a few days for it to collect data. During that waiting period, you hopefully could do a couple of quantitative interviews, meaning that you are running users through a usability test to see if they complete the checkout flow. And there's tons of ways you could do this. You could do this in person by reaching out to existing customers. You could recruit people off Craigslist. You could use a recruiting firm. You could use an online testing service, which includes finding people, so you don't even have to find them. But there's pros and cons to each. I don't have time to get into that, but the whole point is that while your system is gathering the quantitative data, that's not the time to just go to happy hour and hang out and brainstorm about the future. That's the time when you should be getting qualitative research too. And here's why. Because when you present your research to your stakeholders and your boss, you want the mix of quantitative and qualitative, because quantitative tells you what and qualitative tells you why. And how does that happen? Well, when you're doing a usability test with a real person, you're able to get them to kind of express what's in their head. So the goal is that as they're going through the test, they're verbally almost narrating, what they're thinking, what's confusing. People will kind of naturally do this, but also it's important to remind them to just say what's going through their head as they go. Just a sec. This is really good. So quantitative and qualitative, yeah. You really need people to go through the user testing so that you have video evidence. Video evidence is critical when you are presenting your findings, because our brains, whenever we start to hear facts, our brains they don't always remember the facts. And I'm not going to get into this. This is part of the article. But our brains remember stories. The more senses that are engaged, the more we remember. So if in our findings, we can run a video of someone trying to get through the checkout process and show their mouse, not going anywhere near the continue button or going right to the continue button on the other version that we're testing, that type of video is really, really powerful, because it's hard for someone to kind of say, well, I don't think it should be that way, or I don't think it should be this way, or my cousin doesn't think it should be done this way. It's hard for people to use those knee-jerk, I think, justifications when you can play a video, hopefully multiple videos, that clearly show people either definitely responding positively to a version or not responding well at all. That type of evidence is really, really powerful. So don't just stop at quantitative. You want the mix of qualitative so that it complements as evidence, and it's a story that people can latch onto. Because as much as we think, and I'm sure your stakeholders and boss say, I know what the user wants, totally understand, I definitely can be in their shoes. It's not until you watch or have someone watch that first video of someone struggling to do something on a site, and you as the watchers just want to scream and say, like, it's right there, why can't you find it? It's not until someone has experienced the watching of a video like that that it finally clicks, where they realize, maybe I don't know what's best. Maybe there is some value to this research. So all that to say, that's how I kind of go about doing research. I guess we also touched on presenting research and things like that. But this whole idea of minimum viable research, you can't expect your boss to say, yeah, let's go do a 30 grand research project first time doing it. That's just crazy. You have to start them off small. And then you can graduate to larger studies, maybe even doing research in multiple locations. I did research for a project in New York and Stockholm last summer, and that was a ton of work and it was really expensive, but that was not the first research project that company did. They had realized through smaller research that there was a ton of value, and they were finally able to invest in more research. And I guess I should point out, the reason that they wanted to do that research was so that their entire company could have a same understanding of who the customer was, so that the marketing team didn't have one type of user in their head, and the development team didn't have another kind of assumption of who the user was, and the customer service team. They wanted this research so they could all be united on who the user was. And they wanted me to do it as an outsider so that it wouldn't be biased, because they realized that they were so close to it that even if they were to find research participants and try and stay neutral, it was going to be really hard for them to do that because they were just too close to it. So all that to say, minimum viable research, you have to start doing it if you want to be able to get buy-in for larger research projects in the future. So if you have questions, I would love to answer them. I don't see any questions just yet, but we're going to start doing more of these Facebook Lives. So if you like this Facebook page for the UX Notebook, then you'll be able to get notifications when I do more live broadcasts. And I think we're going to experiment with them on Twitter as well, through doing them on Periscope, just to see how it goes and where people want to see live video, if it's on Facebook, if it's on Periscope, or if it's some other place that I am not aware of yet. So that's all for this evening. I gotta run. I have an early morning tomorrow. I'm flying back to New York City I'm out in LA right now. So thank you. And if you want to learn more about user experience, you can get my weekly UX Notebook, which is a newsletter, every Friday. Just go to theuxnotebook.com and you'll get your first issue on Friday. So thanks guys, and go do your minimal viable research, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.